Welcome to a new UTOK special on the UTOK book. I'm here with my lovely fiancée, Márcia Gralha.
Hello. I
Hello.
like that introduction.
Yes,
And
indeed.
here's the ring for those who have not seen it, because I think it's
Mhm.
very pretty and makes me
It's the
happy.
all right. It's the ring of the law of engagement. At some point, we'll perhaps talk about. But our
Yeah.
engagement has now become almost law. So, anyway, for those of you, I'm Gregg Henriquez, partner Márcia
Márcia
Gralha.
Gralha.
Yes, Gralha. We will say that more
You're almost
eloquently.
perfect pronunciation.
All right, it's only taken 2.5 years. We're super excited to be here to launch a new series on UTOK, and it is the
On the You Talk
UTOK.
book.
Yay!
It's a beautiful book, and it's it's a special book for You Talk, I would say. It's very different from the other books that we have. And I think it deserves its own series. We decided to do one episode per chapter. So that means there's a lot of them because there's 30 chapters in this book. But we're trying to keep these to very short, right? So around 20 minutes, give or take. So it's special enough for that. I mean, there's so much content in here. We try to structure this in different ways, but I think the way to structure that really honors all the content that there is in this book is to give an episode to each chapter, so we can talk about how we're thinking about these series.
Amen. And I'm glad you're on the journey with me to do this, in relation. It's exciting. Obviously, I did dedicate the book to you, my love. And nobody knows the system better than you, other than maybe me. And so it's it's a joy and an honor to be able to walk through it with you. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of the book. I'll say really quickly that actually the idea of the book I went on a conference with Zach Stein and Mark Gaffney on their approach to cosmoerotic humanism, and they gave a nice, quick articulation of the core principles of that in about 80 pages. And that was the actual spark for the idea. And then I realized that I wanted to write a different kind of book than I had written. And I wanted to see if I could write something that just sort of like, okay, here it is from my vantage point.
Yeah, and it's very different from the first two books. I think that's something interesting for you to share some about, because UTOK is an old system in some ways, right? The first idea was all the way back in 96, was first published in 2003. It was not UTOK yet, right? It was just individual ideas that began to form a system. So why now in 2024 is this the first book that actually says UTOK on the cover?
Yeah.
So I think that's special, and it would be lovely for you to share some about that.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, so it's an evolution. In fact, there's a chapter which we will cover, a brief chapter. They're all brief. I try to make them all, so less than 5 pages Times New Roman. Didn't always achieve there, but anyway. So very briefly, UTOK originally is me engaged in what is scientific psychology, what's human psychology, scientifically grounded. In academia that bridges into clinical psychology. There's an empirical question of that. And then there's increasingly broad theoretical question to get to meta-theoretical questions and meta-psychological questions like, well, what do we mean by psychology? And as people that know my story know that there actually, there's no good answer for that, is my articulation. That's called the problem of psychology. I stumbled into that. I'm a trained academic. My dad's an academic. I grew up in academia, never really left academia. Went from one school to another school to another school, and then ended up at the University of Pennsylvania, embedded in, sort of the standard traditional view of thinking about the world in an academic way. It means you get trained how to write, argumentation. I much prefer theory to science, to empiricism, which is weird for a clinical psychologist that wants to engage in the academic pursuits, because normally you have to be sort of focused on empirical research. I certainly did some of that, but my whole focus really has been, hey folks, there's a serious problem with the way in which we're structured, and that's in the history of our academic lives, of those of us that are in it. And so that's where I came from. So that's one point. And then the evolution of UTOK really what will become UTOK, has pulled me further and further away from situated and in the current structure of our understanding to realizing that we're needing a real revolution in our worldview, in our fundamental, in the paradigm, to use a particular term, broad paradigm. What is the way in which we're approaching the world? Let's borrow that from Kuhn and to say, okay, your broad justification embedded worldview. And so, as this happened, as the steps that would go first from the justification and then what I would call the tree of knowledge, that was the first step that almost took me outside, but I was still embedded, still writing in a standard academic way. And then the tree of knowledge grew, had more and more things in it, and ultimately becomes the tree of life. And then the garden, that's 2016, 2018. Then this really weird thing happens with the coin in 2018. So that period launched me further out. I was still seeing the philosophical issues and then wrote a new synthesis 2022. That's the continuation of my argument within the academy. But the coin and garden are not included in that book at all. It's a 500-page academic book.
They're glued. The coin is glued on it now, but it's not
right. You can see back here the coin is glued. So that's the tree of knowledge and psychology, meta-psychology argument. Academically, it resides within the traditional system. But I don't know the garden and the coin are so new kinds of knowledge technologies that they're really outside the current structure. There's not really a peer review system. How do we actually apply these things in the world? So ultimately, UTOK doesn't.
It doesn't speak the same language that you were speaking in those books, right? So it got weirder and weirder for academia and just couldn't fit into that, right? So if you read the first two books, they're beautiful, right? And they have dense argumentation. They reference a lot of different things. They go through counter arguments and all of that. It's very detailed and beautiful for people who want to learn UTOK, in a very refined scientific way. They're not going to include all these other weird things because it's just not, I guess it doesn't fit that language system, right? And UTOK's very unique because it can hold both of those things, right? And there are certain messages that you can convey with the UTOK system as a whole, with all of these different elements that doesn't fit into the academic argument. So it's beautiful that we have both of those options, right? The refined scientific argument and this different packaging that bridges into practices, right? That bridges into real life, bridges into worldview and culture and the subject. So, all those beautiful things. So is there anything else that you want to share on the evolution?
No, that's a great setup. And I'll simply say this, because this may encapsulate what. So as a psychotherapist, I wanted, my first journey was I need a science of psychology that's a public, objective kind of knowledge base, okay? And what I would do with people, and I think anybody that does psychotherapy would say things like this in psychotherapy. My job is to be the expert on human psychology and to have a value structure that fits me as a human doctor. That's a public, intersubjective, maybe at some level objective, but it's grounded in some public knowledge. Right? Somebody would come to me and what I would say to them is I would say, hey, you're the expert on you, right? What's going on inside of you from stuff I can't see, your whole unique idiographic history. That was given, and virtually everybody can sort of see that, but I'm telling you, there's no frame for that. Like there's no systematic frame for that bridges then. We just separate the two. Oh, there's real knowledge over here, and now you become an academic refined to get that. And then you have your subjective knowledge over here. Certainly people wondered about the bridge, like how do we bridge subjective to objective? What's the relationship between culture and science and these questions? There's no architecture for that, folks. There's no systematic architecture. UTOK's a totally qualitatively different game. And then what I have found is that that changes your entire worldview. When you actually have an architecture that brings the individual, unique, particular human with their own named history in the here and now, and bridge that to things like the Big Bang and science and quantum field theory and all that other stuff, we don't have any system that does that. Yet now we do. and UTOK fell out of me, as it were, and then reorganized. And this book is fundamentally then is the languaging, new technologies, and maybe that we can go into the cover. We have to say this beautiful cover, this look. It's got an alchemical
Gorgeous.
feel.
Yeah.
I think it's designed not by me. The cover it's designed by our perfect
Clearly.
the grounds. Hey, the groundskeeper of the garden, Christian Gross, developed this, and this sets the stage then for what the mantra of, or captures the mantra,
Yeah.
and gives us
I
a
mean,
beautiful.
we have to say he did a beautiful job of aligning all these different ideas, right? And that's why today we're doing a series on the book. We're not even opening the book today because there's so much already here to explore. And he aligned these ideas in a way that reflected the core mantra really well. Um, and I like this contrast that you're drawing between what this book is, what the past books were, the past work in that were very academic, and how the system flourished in a very different way. And it needed something different to home it. And I can almost predict a misconception that could emerge of like UTOK abandoning the scientific language, which is not the case. I don't know if you
How
can.
could you?
I don't know if you can maybe predict people, thinking that or saying that, because it is so different, right? And I think this bridges right into the mantra. Abandoning is not the right frame. It is marrying it into something different, right? It's finding the right relation between those things. Do you want to share something about
Yeah.
that?
First off, that's beautiful. It's super important. I'm really glad. It's so obvious to me that that's not the way it is. I will overlook the fact that it might feel that way to other people. Let me a central concept that is in the book and that I've come to. I used to call it complexity. Really, it's complexification is the much better conflicts, and what that means is it's parts coming together to create a stabilized whole with increasing integration and differentiation. Okay, and when I talk about cumulative knowledge, and what I felt was missing in psychology was cumulative knowledge that relates to complexification. We're not putting stuff together better. We're just gathering more pieces. They're not coming together. I have experienced UTOK to be a complexification system, meaning that it grabs stuff and stays. This little diagram behind me, popped out of my head in 1997, is an architecture that has exactly the same basic structure. Yes, and I'm open to change, but it stays, holds, and grows. My scientific training as a behavioral scientist, naturalistic behavioral scientist, has not changed. The issue is that it's incomplete and inadequate. That's the issue. And now I've grown to see how consistency can be held with that. And you can now include what I would say, based on a common sense thing. I'm not an expert on you. That's your subjective, unique perspective in the world. But I would be giving up normally my behavioral science frame as I say that, because it's inadequate. So almost everyone can see it grows to hold behavioral science and then includes in a complexifying way and maintains its grounding in science. In fact, I will say, bar none, anybody could do, UTOK is the most sophisticated, scientific, holistic view, bar none, period. I don't care whether you go to physicists, I don't care whether you go to philosophers, I don't care whether you go to whatever the latest cutting edge research is. No system is more scientific than UTOK, period.
Right. And because it does both of those things, right? Because it does the refined argumentation and it does that in depth, it doesn't do it in a superficial way. Of course, it is honed in psychology, but it doesn't stay only within psychology, right? It makes very important philosophical claims, and it frames the other disciplines as well in a consilient way, in a refined scientific way, as you did in those books, and then it bridges into the language of the subject and of culture. And I guess arguably there's no way to have a Consilience system that doesn't do that, that doesn't bridge into those different languages, because then you're not having a complete picture of the world, right? Because those are essential.
I appreciate you bringing the word consilience in. Some people ask, some people get confused with the term or ask what unified means, or is it universal, or does it mean everything? Just in its academic roots, consilience is a direct reference to unified, or unified is a direct reference to consilience. That's E.O. Wilson's term in 1997 for what would a holistic, unified framework, coherent, holistic framework that includes the humanities, which by the way then splits into, at the individual level, the subject, and then at the cultural level, the group, okay, of arts and then cultures and etc. That's the humanities. And then in science, and how you actually merge the natural sciences to the social sciences. So what's a coherent picture of natural sciences, social sciences, subject, and culture? That's consilience. He doesn't achieve consilience. He actually tries to reduce it to natural science, basically. And that's the critique. That is a valid critique. It fails. He doesn't understand the problem of psychology. UTOK comes along and gets those pieces. Natural science, social science, subject, and culture, all in right relation. And then it does things, weird things. It goes, this has got an alchemical feel. If we want to get into it for our final aspect of this opening thing, we'll talk a little about the symbolism here. It's got an alchemical feel, and I'm arguing that it's bridging. Actually, I saw Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson recently were dialoguing, and they were like, oh, what's a meme? What's an archetype? Well, a meme, can I argue, is the fundamental cultural element in the paradigm of a culture and the replicating aspects of what gives rise to a culture. An archetype is the underlying psychological human nature structure, that why certain patterns repeat, why do they get deep, what evolves. Well, UTOK is scientific, it's archetypal, and it's paradigmatic, in this case meaning it's a whole cultural system, at least potential for that. So that makes it new, makes it weird, makes it either cool or alienating and alone. Those things are
another important aspect is that it will have some widely generalizable aspects to it. And of course, the scientific language is very important for that, to give that generalizability, and that's more explicit in the first two books, and that's still going to hold here, of course, because this book is going to go through all of the ideas that are scientific, but then it has this ideographic aspect to it too, right? We like this aesthetic. It's pretty, it is archetypal in many different ways, but maybe there's a person who doesn't like it, who hates the way it looks, thinks it's ugly. I find that difficult, but maybe that exists, and that's fine, right? The ideas in the system, the conclusions that it makes, can still hold in a different packaging that could be more pleasant ideographically for somebody else.
Right. Well, in fact, we released the UTOK website, which has much more of a futuristic angle on it. And that was part of actually intentional. There's a lot of work. Again, thanks to Christian and Andrew Robinson, also in the Inner Circle and things like that, help set that up. But the point of it is that there's a whole nother aesthetic. And the argument for UTOK's architecture would be that that aesthetic could go lots of different places. So let's actually, there is a symbolism in UTOK that carries its core elements, and this gets captured by this. Maybe we'll take a little bit. So the mantra, as given on the back of the book here, of UTOK, if we're just framing it, like put it in a sentence, they always say, can you put it in a sentence? That mantra is marry the coin to the tree in the garden under God. And this depiction, okay, if you want a guide to this, if you want to put it on a t-shirt, okay, which essentially then translates into essentially an equation type architecture, if you do this in a particular sort of way, gives us a framework for understanding that mantra.
Yeah, we got all the elements here, right? The coin, a lot of people will already know the coin, probably, who know UTOK. That's the mirror, right, for your human identity. And then the tree is the tree of knowledge, not the obvious tree of life. So that's the coin, married to the tree in the garden. That's the depiction of the garden under God, which is UTOK's representation of the transcendent, right? So that's beautifully depicted in the cover.
Actually, if you could hold up that for a second, dear, you hold yours up. I'm going to then rotate this, okay? And what you can see on the rotation here is on human, the coin is in the shape of an H, and it rotates in the shape of an I, okay? That gives you your human identity. And what that ultimately, what it evolves into is like, okay, what are you? And what the human identity says, hey, you're in this moment, you're having moments of epistemic ontic. Epistemic is knowing about reality that you're aware of. And what you know is the information. You say, oh, I see Gregg holding the book, or I see a cup, okay? That's your moment of ontic, we call that ontic epistemic, means that in the real that you know that you have access to or awareness of. That's an instant, okay, of human consciousness from the subjective. And then you have a matrix of that where you say, oh, that's relevant to me, that's not, this is my memory, this is my named person, I am this way, okay? So that's the instant, and then the matrix. And so the human identity functional matrix is your named experience of being in the world as a human person. that has these instances of ontic epistemic awareness that then form a matrix that you then fill in with your own unique idiographic position, phenomenological, qualitative experience of being in the world. That, by the way, is your human identity. Okay?
Which will connect to other human identities, right, in a cultural context. And that's going to give you the embedding of those moments of ontic epistemic awareness that create this narrative of a person's identity with other people in a cultural context, in a given nation, in a given set of.
And that linkage then is right here. So when you're going to then marry this, when we say marry the coin, means you rotate it. And there's in the book explains this more. You rotate it. Then that's the culture person. Then this is your minded animal. You're a living organism, a material object on an energy information field. And we've rotated it. Then oriented in some way to live in a culture adaptively toward the good. And so this is what's symbolized in this. In other words, the garden then is the network of justifications that includes both facts and values grounded in this, and then ultimately oriented toward the transcendent. So that's marry the coin, rotate your human identity to see it in right relationship to natural science, across culture, person, living organism, minded animal, living organism, material object, and energy information field, and then cultivate what ought to be. The garden is a map of that. It's not the only map of that. But the garden under God is the idea of what's the ultimate transcendent goodness, truth, and beauty. How can we love that in our being? And that's the symbolism of this.
That's it. Yep. And we can begin to wrap it up, because we're getting close to 25 minutes. But that's a beautiful way to put how UTOK marries is and not, right? How it gives you a coherent, conciliant description of the natural world, including human culture, including the human subject, and then orients that. And I think that we're going to get into this next time. But I like how the table of contents shows that in the sections. I mean, it starts with the context and the problems that we face currently, goes through the UTOK philosophical pillars, goes through the descriptive metaphysics, and we'll talk about what that is and what that entails, the unified theory, the unified approach. Then it gets into the garden and the orienting vision toward wisdom in the 21st century. And I think that's a good just outlook, that shows how it goes from a coherent sense, make coherent understanding into what ought to be. And UTOK's opinion, at least. So
amen to that. So to summarize, hey folks out there, the advertisement's pretty clear here. There is a way to organize science coherently, all the way from physics to sociology, including then solving the problem of psychology that bridges into a coherent and common core approach, my love, to psychotherapy that we did together, okay, and also includes you as a unique particular subject in the world, and also bridges us to the insights of the collective wisdom traditions and frames culture anywhere from less wisdom things like modern day politics, perhaps, into things like Buddhism and other kinds of wisdom traditions. And that's what UTOK affords you. So if you think the world's kind of chaotic, you think the world's kind of messy, thinking that science has given all these insights, but we can't make sense out of it all relative to a meaningful engagement in what John Berger might call the transjective way of being in the world that orients us towards transcendence. That's our transcendent natural reference. Voila, come here. Join us on this journey of the book. Read the book along with us as we go through these chapters. And our law of engagement, I think, is a testament of the love and beauty and the possibilities humans can come together and live UTOK fully. And let me say, the last 2.5 years have been lovely doing that with you, Mother.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So,
all right, my love. Then we reached our goal of 20 minutes. Yay.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you folks next time. We'll dive more further into the book, and please join us on this journey. It's lovely. Okay.